The first shot rang out across the dusty plains of Wyoming Territory just as Katherine, Kate, Monroe bent down to tighten the leather strap of her boot, causing her to fall behind the wagon train once again. It was 1874, and the caravan heading west had already made it clear they wouldn't tolerate stragglers, especially not a woman they considered more burden than asset. "Keep up or stay behind!" the wagon master hollered as the line of covered wagons picked up speed, dust billowing in their wake. "Indians spotted to the north!" Kate's heart pounded against her chest as she scrambled to her feet, wincing at the familiar pain that shot through her left leg. The childhood injury had never healed properly, leaving her with a permanent limp that slowed her pace no matter how desperately she tried to keep up. "Wait!" she called out, her voice swallowed by the rumbling of wheels and frightened shouts. But the wagons continued forward, the gap between her and the last vehicle growing wider by the second. She had joined the wagon train 3 weeks earlier in Fort Laramie after her uncle's death left her with no home and no prospects. The journey west promised a new beginning, but now she watched that promise disappear into the horizon, abandoning her to the vast emptiness of the Wyoming wilderness. Tears burned her eyes as she sank to her knees in the middle of the trail. 22 years old and alone in Indian Territory with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small satchel containing her meager possessions. "They're not worth your tears, miss." The deep voice startled her, and Kate whirled around to find a man sitting atop a chestnut stallion. Dust coated his denim pants and faded blue shirt, and a weathered cowboy hat cast a shadow over his face. A Winchester rifle rested across his lap, and his eyes scanned the horizon with practiced vigilance. "Those shots were just some boys hunting, not Indians," he continued, dismounting with fluid grace. "But your wagon train took off like they had the devil himself on their heels." Kate hurriedly wiped her tears away with the back of her hand. "They left me behind. Again." The stranger's expression darkened. "That's no way to treat anyone, especially not a lady." He removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached brown hair and a face weathered by years under the western sun. "Name's Roy Wilson. I've got a small ranch about 10 miles west of here." "Katherine Monroe," she replied, trying to maintain some dignity despite her circumstances. "Kate." Roy studied her for a moment, his blue eyes taking in her limp as she struggled to stand. "You're hurt." "No," Kate said automatically, the defensive response ingrained after years of pity. "It's an old injury." "I'm just slower than most." Understanding dawned in his expression, but there was no pity in his eyes, only a quiet respect that made her stand a little straighter. "Well, Miss Monroe, I can't in good conscience leave you out here alone. There's a town called Sweetwater about 30 miles west. I can take you there if you'd like." Kate hesitated, weighing her limited options. Trust this stranger or face certain death in the wilderness? "I don't want to be a burden," she said softly. Roy placed his hat back on his head and smiled a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "No burden at all. I've learned there's value in moving at the right pace, not just the fastest one." He offered his hand to help her onto his horse, but Kate shook her head. "I can walk." Roy studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Then I'll walk beside you, not ahead." The simple statement, delivered without fanfare, struck Kate with unexpected force. All her life, people had charged forward, leaving her behind or dragging her along. No one had ever simply chosen to match her pace. "The town's too far to walk," Roy continued, leading his horse by the reins. "But there's a small trading post about 5 miles from here. We can rest there and figure out your next steps." "Thank you," Kate said, the words inadequate for the relief flooding through her. As they set off, Kate braced herself for the inevitable moment when Roy's patience would wear thin, when he'd urge her to move faster or simply leave her behind like all the others. But the moment never came. He matched his stride to hers without comment, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing stories about the territory. "Been in Wyoming long?" Roy asked as they crested a small hill. "Just a few weeks," Kate replied. "My uncle passed away back east. There was nothing left for me there." Roy nodded, understanding in his eyes. The West has a way of collecting lost souls. Came out here myself 10 years ago after the war with nothing but nightmares and a horse. The war between the states? Kate asked. Yes, madam. Fought for the Union. Wasn't much older than you when it ended. Kate studied him with new interest. He couldn't be more than 32 or 33, but his eyes held the weight of experiences beyond his years. And now you have a ranch? She asked. A proud smile crossed Roy's face. Nothing fancy. 100 acres, small herd of cattle. It's quiet, but it's mine. As they walked, the sun climbed higher in the sky, beating down mercilessly. Kate could feel sweat trickling down her back, and her leg throbbed with increasing intensity. Still, she pressed forward, determined not to slow them down more than necessary. Need to rest? Roy asked, noticing her grimace. No, Kate said automatically, then reconsidered. Yes, actually. Just for a moment. They stopped beneath the sparse shade of a scrubby tree. Roy handed her his canteen, and Kate took a careful sip of the cool water. You don't have to pretend with me, Roy said quietly. There's no shame in knowing your limits. Kate looked up, surprised by his perception. Most people don't see it that way. Most people are fools, Roy replied with a slight grin. Out here, pushing beyond your limits gets you killed. Knowing when to stop and when to go is wisdom, not weakness. They continued their journey after the brief rest, the trading post appearing on the horizon as the afternoon began to wane. The small collection of buildings looked like heaven to Kate's tired eyes. The trading post consisted of a general store, a small stable, and a two-room structure that served as both saloon and inn. As they approached, a gray-haired man stepped onto the porch of the general store, rifle in hand. That's far enough, strangers, he called out. Roy raised his hand in a peaceful gesture. Afternoon, friend. Roy Wilson from over near Sweetwater. Just escorting the lady to safety after her wagon train left her behind. The man lowered his rifle slightly. Wilson? You're that rancher who brings cattle through twice a year? The same, Roy confirmed. The man relaxed and propped his rifle against the wall. Come on in then. Name's Jeremiah Barnes. Own this little slice of nowhere. Inside the store, Kate marveled at the array of goods stacked on rough wooden shelves: canned foods, tools, fabric, ammunition, and other essentials for frontier life. Got a room in back if you need rest, Jeremiah offered, eyeing Kate's exhausted face. Thank you, Kate said gratefully. But I have no money. I'll cover it, Roy said before Jeremiah could respond. And whatever supplies she needs. Kate turned to him, startled. Mr. Wilson, I can't accept. You can and you will, Roy said firmly. Consider it a loan if your pride demands it. You can repay me when you're settled. Before Kate could protest further, the door burst open and a young boy of about 12 rushed in, his eyes wide with excitement. Mr. Barnes! Riders coming from the east. Looks like the Johnson wagon train. Kate's heart sank. The very people who had abandoned her were now arriving at the trading post. Roy must have read her expression. We can leave if you prefer. Kate straightened her shoulders. No. I won't hide. Within minutes, the sound of wagons and horses filled the air. The wagon master, a burly man named Harold Peck, was the first to enter the store. He stopped short when he saw Kate. Well, look who survived, he said, his surprise quickly masked with indifference. Thought the wolves would have gotten you by now, girl. Roy stepped forward, his posture relaxed but somehow commanding. Miss Monroe is under my protection now, Mr. Peck. Peck sized up the cowboy, noting the well-worn gun belt and steady gaze. No offense meant. We've got a schedule to keep, and she was slowing us down. Survival of the fittest out here. Is that so? Roy's voice remained even, but Kate noticed his hand had drifted closer to his holster. Where I come from, we don't leave women alone in Indian Territory, schedule or not. Tension crackled in the air as the two men stared at each other. Finally, Peck shrugged and turned away. Your business, not mine. We're moving on at first light tomorrow. As the members of the wagon train filtered in and out of the store, Kate received a mixture of guilty glances and outright avoidance. Only a few bothered to express relief at seeing her alive. That night, Kate sat with Roy on the porch of the trading post, watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. The wagon train had set up camp nearby, but it felt like a different world from where they sat. "What will you do now?" Roy asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Kate sighed. "I don't know. I was heading to Oregon to stay with a distant cousin, but I have no way to get there now." Roy took a sip from his coffee cup. "What skills do you have?" "I can read and write better than most. I kept my uncle's books for his hardware store," Kate replied. "I can sew, cook decent enough." Roy nodded thoughtfully. "Sweetwater's growing. The general store owner, Mrs. Calloway, was saying just last month she needs help with her accounts. And there's the new school that's looking for a teacher." Kate turned to look at him, hope flickering to life. "You think I could find work there?" "I do," Roy said. "It's a rough place in some ways, but good people for the most part. They judge on character more than—" He gestured vaguely toward her leg. "How would I get there?" Kate asked. "I can't walk 30 miles. Roy set his cup down. "I've been thinking on that. I've got business with Jeremiah that'll take most of tomorrow. Day after, I head back to my ranch. You're welcome to ride with me to Sweetwater. I can introduce you around." Kate studied his face in the dim light, searching for ulterior motives but finding only sincerity. In the short time she'd known Roy Wilson, he had shown her more kindness than she'd experienced in years. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally. Roy was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "During the war, I was wounded at Gettysburg. Took a bullet to the shoulder. My regiment moved on while I recovered in a field hospital. Know what it's like to be left behind." He turned to face her. "And I believe everyone deserves a chance to find their place." The simple honesty of his answer touched something deep within Kate. For the first time since her uncle's death, she felt a flicker of belonging. "Thank you," she said softly. "I would be grateful for your help reaching Sweetwater." 2 days later, Kate found herself seated behind Roy on his horse, her arms wrapped hesitantly around his waist as they traveled westward. They had left the trading post at dawn, with Jeremiah Barnes waving them off and the wagon train already a distant memory on the eastern horizon. The journey to Sweetwater was unlike anything Kate had experienced. Roy pointed out landmarks and shared the history of the territory, from the native tribes who had first inhabited the land to the trappers and settlers who came later. He showed her how to read the weather from cloud patterns and how to identify edible plants that grew along the trail. When they stopped to rest, he never rushed her, never showed impatience when her legs stiffened and she needed extra time to walk it out. Instead, he would simply say, "Take all the time you need," and occupy himself with checking their supplies or tending to his horse. By mid-afternoon, Sweetwater appeared in the distance, a collection of wooden buildings nestled in a valley with mountains rising majestically behind it. It was larger than Kate had expected, with at least 30 structures forming a proper main street. "It's grown since I first came through," Roy explained. "The silver mine 15 miles north brought the railroad, and the railroad brought people." As they rode down the main street, Kate took in the sights: a proper hotel, 2 saloons, a church, a bank, and various shops. People called out greetings to Roy, who responded with friendly waves and nods. "Wilson! Been wondering when you'd show your face in town again," called a broad-shouldered man exiting the bank. "Afternoon, Sheriff Dixon," Roy replied, reining his horse to a stop. "Been busy with the spring calving." The sheriff's curious gaze shifted to Kate. Roy quickly made introductions, explaining her situation without dwelling on the wagon train's abandonment. "Mrs. Calloway's still looking for help at the general store," the sheriff confirmed. "And the hotel needs a housekeeper since Miss Abigail ran off with that piano player last month." Hope bloomed in Kate's chest. Perhaps Sweetwater could indeed be her fresh start. Roy took her first to the general store, where Mrs. Eliza Calloway, a formidable widow in her 50s with sharp eyes and an even sharper wit, put Kate through an impromptu test of her arithmetic and writing skills. "Your penmanship is excellent," Mrs. Calloway declared, examining Kate's neat figures in her ledger. "And you've spotted 3 errors I've been looking for all week." She closed the book with a decisive snap. "The job is yours if you want it. $6 a week and a room above the store." Kate nearly wept with relief. "Thank you, Mrs. Calloway. I accept." "Good. You start tomorrow." "Now, Roy Wilson, I expect you'll be needing supplies for that ranch of yours?" As Roy conducted his business, Kate wandered the store, fingering fabrics and examining household goods she might soon be able to afford. Independence had always seemed like a distant dream, but now it was within her grasp. Later, as Roy walked her to the hotel where she would stay until moving into her room above the store, Kate struggled to express her gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she began. Roy shook his head. "No thanks needed. You earned that job on your own merits. Not just for that. For not leaving me behind. For walking beside me." Something shifted in Roy's expression, a softening around his eyes, a slight curve of his lips. "It was my pleasure, Miss Monroe." At the hotel steps, he hesitated. "My ranch is about 5 miles west of town." "Not far. I come in for supplies every couple of weeks." "I would like to see you again," Kate said, surprising herself with her boldness. A genuine smile spread across Roy's face. "Then you will." True to his word, Roy appeared at the general store 2 weeks later, ostensibly to purchase supplies but spending most of his visit leaning against the counter, sharing news of his ranch while Kate sorted inventory. "How are you settling in?" he asked, watching as she recorded figures in the ledger. "Very well," Kate replied, unable to suppress her smile. "Mrs. Calloway is demanding but fair. I've made a few friends, and the room upstairs is small but comfortable. And the townsfolk? They treating you right?" Kate nodded. "Better than I expected. No one seems to care much about my limp. They're more interested in whether I can count their change correctly." Roy laughed, the sound warming Kate in ways she hadn't anticipated. "That's sweet water for you. Practical to the core." These visits became a regular occurrence. Every 2 weeks Roy would appear, sometimes staying only long enough to purchase supplies and share a cup of coffee, other times lingering until Mrs. Calloway shooed him out so Kate could finish her work. As spring turned to summer, Kate found herself looking forward to these visits with increasing anticipation. Roy was unlike any man she had known, quiet but not withdrawn, strong but never imposing, and always considerate of her pace, both physically and emotionally. One hot July afternoon, Roy arrived at the store looking uncharacteristically nervous. He waited until Mrs. Calloway stepped out to deliver an order before approaching the counter. "I was wondering if you might like to have dinner with me tonight," he said, twisting his hat in his hands. "At the hotel restaurant. It's not fancy, but the food's good." Kate felt her cheeks warm. "I would like that very much." That evening, dressed in her best blue calico dress, Kate met Roy at the hotel. He had traded his work clothes for a clean shirt and dark pants, his hair still damp from washing. The conversation flowed easily between them as they shared a meal of beef stew and fresh bread. Roy told her about his plans to expand his herd, while Kate shared her newfound passion for helping run the store. "Mrs. Calloway is talking about making me assistant manager," she said proudly. "Says I have a head for business." "She's right," Roy agreed. "You've got a sharp mind, Kate." The use of her first name sent a pleasant shiver through her. Until that moment, he had always called her Miss Monroe. As they walked back to the general store after dinner, Roy offered his arm, and Kate took it without hesitation. The simple contact made her heart race in a way that both frightened and excited her. At the door to the store, Roy paused. "I've enjoyed this evening." "As have I," Kate replied softly. He hesitated, then leaned down and placed a gentle kiss on her cheek. "Good night, Kate." "Good night, Roy." she whispered, watching as he walked away into the gathering darkness. That night marked a shift in their relationship. Roy's visits to town became more frequent, and they began spending time together whenever his ranch duties allowed: picnics by the creek, Sunday services at the small church, even a town dance where Roy patiently followed Kate's slower steps without a hint of frustration. In late August, Roy invited Kate to visit his ranch. Mrs. Calloway, who had watched their courtship with approving eyes, gave Kate the day off with a knowing smile. "That man's been alone too long," the older woman commented as Kate prepared to leave. "And so have you, my dear." The 5-mile journey passed quickly as Roy pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the land. When they crested the final hill, Kate gasped at the sight below. The ranch was nestled in a small valley, a modest but well-built cabin surrounded by corrals and outbuildings. A creek wound through the property, bordered by cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade. Cattle grazed on the surrounding hillsides, and a vegetable garden flourished near the house. "It's beautiful," Kate breathed. Roy watched her reaction with evident pleasure. "It's not much compared to some of the big spreads, but it's home." The cabin was simple but comfortable, with a main room serving as both kitchen and living area, and 2 small bedrooms off to the side. Everything was meticulously clean, if somewhat Spartan in its furnishings. "I built most of it myself," Roy explained as he showed her around. "Started with just a 1-room shack and kept adding on as I could afford it." "You've accomplished so much on your own," Kate said admiringly. Roy's expression grew thoughtful. "It's enough for one man. But lately I've been thinking it could be more." The implication of his words hung in the air between them, either quite ready to acknowledge it directly. They spent the day exploring the property, with Roy showing her his small herd of cattle and the vegetable garden he tended. Kate was impressed by his self-sufficiency and the obvious care he took with his land. As the sun began to set, they sat on the porch, watching the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and pink. "I should get you back to town before dark," Roy said reluctantly. Kate nodded, though she was loath for the day to end. Something about this place, about being here with Roy, felt right in a way few things in her life ever had. On the ride back to Sweetwater, Kate found herself imagining what it would be like to live on that ranch, to build a life with this man who had quite literally walked beside her when everyone else had rushed ahead. The autumn months brought changes to Sweetwater. The silver mine increased production, bringing more workers and their families to town. The general store thrived, and Kate found herself taking on more responsibilities as Mrs. Calloway's trusted assistant. Roy's visits remained constant, though the demands of preparing his ranch for winter sometimes kept him away longer than either of them liked. When heavy snow fell in early November, Kate worried about him alone at his ranch, but he appeared in town 3 days after the storm, his coat crusted with ice but his smile warm as ever when he saw her. "Thought the snow might have buried you," Kate teased, relief evident in her voice. "Takes more than a blizzard to keep me from seeing you," Roy replied, his eyes conveying what his words did not. As Christmas approached, the town organized a holiday celebration at the newly completed schoolhouse. Kate helped decorate, hanging evergreen boughs and red ribbons while Mrs. Calloway supervised the preparation of food. The night of the celebration, Roy arrived in town wearing a new shirt and his Sunday boots. He presented Kate with a small wrapped package. "It's not much," he said apologetically, "but I wanted you to have something." Inside was a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a flower. "It's beautiful," Kate gasped, touching it reverently. "It was my mother's," Roy explained quietly. "One of the few things I have of hers." The significance of the gift was not lost on Kate. She pinned it carefully to her dress, then presented Roy with her own gift, a hand-knitted scarf she had worked on during quiet evenings in her room. "So you won't freeze on those winter rides," she explained as he wrapped it around his neck. The celebration was filled with music, food, and laughter. As the evening wore on, someone started playing a slow waltz on the fiddle, and couples moved to the cleared space in the center of the room. Roy turned to Kate with a questioning look. "Would you care to dance?" I'm not very good, she warned. My leg. Doesn't matter to me, Roy interrupted gently. We'll go as slow as you need. And they did. While other couples whirled around them, Roy and Kate moved at their own pace, his hand steady at her waist, his steps carefully matching hers. For once, Kate didn't feel self-conscious about her limp or worry about keeping up. In Roy's arms, she felt only the joy of the moment. As the music ended, Roy didn't immediately release her. Instead, he looked down at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Kate, he said softly, would you walk with me outside for a moment? The night air was crisp and cold, their breath forming clouds in the moonlight. They walked a short distance from the schoolhouse, the sounds of the celebration fading behind them. Roy stopped beneath a large cottonwood tree, turning to face Kate. I've been thinking a lot about the future lately. Kate's heart began to race. Have you? He nodded, suddenly looking nervous. My ranch. It's a good piece of land. Could support a family well enough. He took a deep breath. What I'm trying to say, not very well, is that I love you, Kate Monroe. Have since that day on the trail when you refused to let being left behind break your spirit. Tears welled in Kate's eyes as joy surged through her. Roy, let me finish before I lose my nerve, he said with a small smile. I know it hasn't been that long, and maybe I'm rushing things. But when something's right, you know it. He took her hands in his. I'm asking if you'd consider becoming my wife. Sharing my ranch, my name, my life. Kate didn't hesitate. Yes, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, I will marry you, Roy Wilson. The relief and happiness that spread across his face made Kate's heart swell. Roy pulled her gently into his arms and kissed her, a tender, reverent kiss that promised a lifetime of being valued, respected, and loved. They were married on New Year's Day, 1875, in a small church in Sweetwater. Mrs. Calloway acted as Kate's matron of honor, while Sheriff Dixon stood as Roy's best man. The entire town turned out for the celebration, filling the church and the hotel restaurant where the reception was held afterward. As Kate prepared to leave the general store for the last time as an employee, Mrs. Calloway pressed a package into her hands. A wedding gift, the older woman explained. And a thank you for all your hard work. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound ledger book with Wilson Ranch embossed on the cover. Every successful ranch needs proper bookkeeping, Mrs. Calloway said with a wink. And you'll be back to help me with inventory every month, wedding or not. The journey to the ranch that evening was different from all those that had come before. This time, Kate rode beside Roy on her own horse, a wedding gift from her new husband. And this time, she wasn't a visitor but a resident, a wife returning to her home. As they approached the cabin, Roy suddenly reined in his horse. Tradition says I should carry you across the threshold? Kate laughed. I'm not sure that's practical with my... Before she could finish, Roy had dismounted and swept her off her horse into his arms. Nothing wrong with my strength, Mrs. Wilson, he said with a grin, carrying her effortlessly to the cabin door. Inside, Kate gasped in surprise. The sparse furnishings she remembered had been supplemented with new items: curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt on the bed, a rocking chair by the fireplace, and bookshelves filled with volumes she recognized from Roy's descriptions of his favorites. When did you do all this? She asked, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. Been working on it since you said yes, Roy admitted. Wanted it to feel like your home too, not just mine. That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Kate reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From being abandoned on that dusty trail to finding a home, a purpose, and a love she had never imagined possible. What are you thinking about? Roy asked, his voice soft in the darkness. About how sometimes being left behind leads you exactly where you're meant to be, Kate replied, nestling closer to him. Roy's arms tightened around her. I'll never leave you behind, Kate. That's a promise. I know, she whispered. You'll walk beside me. The winter passed in a blur of domestic happiness for the newlyweds. Kate quickly adapted to ranch life, applying her organizational skills to the household and business aspects while Roy handled the livestock and land management. They made a formidable team, each complementing the other's strengths. On Kate's suggestion, they began keeping detailed records of cattle breeding, feed costs, and market prices, information that helped them make more informed decisions about their small but growing operation. "You've got a better head for business than half the ranchers in the territory," Roy commented one evening as they reviewed their ledgers by lamplight. Kate smiled, still not entirely used to having her intelligence valued so openly. "It's just arithmetic and common sense." "It's more than that," Roy insisted. "You see opportunities others miss." As spring approached, Kate began to notice changes in her body: a persistent tiredness, sensitivity to certain smells, and most telling, the absence of her monthly cycle. She kept her suspicions to herself until she was certain, wanting the moment of sharing the news with Roy to be perfect. That opportunity came on a mild April evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a habit they had established in their months of marriage. "I've been thinking about the second bedroom," Kate began casually. "We should consider turning it into a nursery." Roy continued watching the sunset for a moment before her words registered. He turned to her slowly, hope dawning in his eyes. "Kate? Are you saying?" She nodded, unable to contain her smile. "According to my calculations, we should welcome our child around November." The joy that transformed Roy's face was something Kate knew she would remember for the rest of her life. He fell to his knees before her chair, placing gentle hands on her still flat stomach. "A baby," he whispered in awe. "Our baby." That night, as they lay in bed making plans for the future, Roy suddenly propped himself up on one elbow. "I want you to know something, Kate." She looked up at him questioningly. "Having a child won't change how I feel about your pace. I won't ever rush you, especially not then. We'll face parenthood like we've faced everything else together, side by side." Tears filled Kate's eyes at his understanding. The fear that pregnancy and motherhood might emphasize her physical limitations had been lurking at the edges of her happiness. "Thank you," she whispered, pulling him close, "for always knowing what I need to hear." Word of Kate's pregnancy spread quickly through Sweetwater during their monthly visits to town. Mrs. Calloway immediately began knitting baby clothes, while other townswomen offered advice and support. The community that had welcomed Kate now embraced the prospect of a new life among them. As summer heat gave way to autumn chill, Kate's body grew heavy with child. Her mobility, already compromised by her permanent limp, became more challenging as her pregnancy advanced. Roy responded by adapting their routine, bringing more of her daily tasks within easy reach and taking on additional household chores without comment or complaint. In late October, with the baby's arrival imminent, Roy insisted that Kate stay in town at the hotel for the final weeks of her pregnancy. The ranch was too isolated if complications arose, and the town doctor would be nearby in Sweetwater. "I don't want to be apart from you," Kate protested, even as she acknowledged the wisdom of his plan. "It's just for a few weeks," Roy assured her. "I'll ride in every day, and Mrs. Calloway has already offered you the room above the store again." Reluctantly, Kate agreed. The separation was difficult, but Roy kept his promise, arriving in town each morning and staying until evening, returning to the ranch only to tend to essential chores. On November 12, 1875, as the first snow of winter began to fall, Katherine Wilson went into labor. The town doctor was summoned, along with Mrs. Calloway and 2 other women who served as midwives for the community. Roy paced outside the room for hours, his face growing more haggard with each scream that pierced the door. Just before midnight, a new cry filled the air, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. When finally allowed inside, Roy found Kate propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a white blanket. "You have a daughter," Kate said softly as he approached. Roy's hands trembled as he carefully took the infant, staring in wonder at the tiny face with its shock of dark hair. "She's perfect," he whispered. "I thought we might name her Rose," Kate suggested. "After your mother." Roy looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Rose Wilson. It's beautiful. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, cradling his daughter in one arm while taking Kate's hand with the other. Thank you. For her, for you, for everything. 3 weeks later, with the doctor's approval, Roy brought his wife and daughter home to the ranch. He had spent the intervening time preparing the nursery, enlisting help from town to build a cradle and rocking chair specifically designed for Kate's comfort. As they entered the cabin together, Rose sleeping peacefully in Kate's arms, Roy wrapped an arm around his wife's shoulders. Welcome home, both of you, he said softly. The following spring brought new changes to the Wilson Ranch. With the proceeds from a successful cattle sale, Roy was able to hire a young cowhand to help with the expanding herd, giving him more time to spend with his family. Kate thrived in her role as mother and ranch wife, balancing caring for Rose with maintaining the household and business records. Her monthly trips to Sweetwater became family outings, with Rose drawing admirers wherever they went. On a warm June day, as Rose napped in her cradle, Kate found Roy outside the barn, repairing a broken wheel on their wagon. I've been thinking, she said, settling on a nearby stool. Roy looked up with a smile. Always a dangerous sign. Kate laughed. The ranch is doing well. Better than expected, according to our ledgers. Due in no small part to your management, Roy acknowledged, setting down his tools. I was thinking we might consider expanding in a different way, Kate continued. The Petersons' property to the east has been abandoned since they moved to California. It has that small cabin that could be fixed up. Roy raised an eyebrow. You're thinking of buying more land? Not exactly, Kate said. I'm thinking of offering it as a home for someone else who might need a fresh start. She paused. Someone like me. Understanding dawned in Roy's eyes. You mean taking people who've been left behind? Give them a chance? Kate nodded. Just one at a time. Someone who needs what you gave me a chance to move at their own pace, to find their place. Roy was quiet for a long moment, considering. Then he smiled, that same warm smile that had first given Kate hope on a dusty trail over a year ago. I think that's a fine idea, Mrs. Wilson. A mighty fine idea. By the following year, the Wilson Ranch had expanded not just in acreage, but in purpose. The abandoned Peterson cabin had been renovated and became home to a young man named Daniel, a former soldier who had lost a leg in a mining accident. Under Roy's guidance, he learned ranching skills adapted to his abilities, eventually becoming an indispensable part of their operation. Word spread about the Wilsons' willingness to offer opportunity to those others deemed too slow, too damaged, or too different. By 1878, a small community had formed around the original ranch, 3 cabins housing individuals who contributed to the collective success of what locals now called Wilson's Haven. Kate's ledgers tracked not just cattle and crops but the progress of their extended family, Daniel's growing skill with horses, Mary's thriving vegetable gardens, and old Thomas's remarkable carpentry. 5-year-old Rose grew up surrounded by this diverse community, learning from an early age that value wasn't measured by speed or conventional ability but by character and contribution. Her younger brother James, born in the spring of 1877, toddled after her with the same accepting nature. On the 10-year anniversary of the day Roy found Kate abandoned on the trail, they stood together on the porch of their expanded home, watching the sunset as had become their tradition. Did you ever imagine this? Kate asked, gesturing to the small community that had grown around them. In the distance, they could see Daniel riding in with the cattle, Mary hanging laundry outside her cabin, and their children playing with Thomas's grandchildren who had joined him the previous year. Roy shook his head, wrapping an arm around her waist. Not specifically. But I knew from that first day that you were special. That walking beside you would lead somewhere good. Kate leaned into his embrace, thinking of the frightened, abandoned young woman she had been and the confident, purposeful woman she had become. All because you were willing to match my pace, she said softly. Roy turned her to face him, his eyes reflecting the same steady love they had shown for a decade. best decision I ever made was slowing down to walk beside you." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Kate thought about the journey that had brought them here, not just the physical distance from that dusty trail to this thriving ranch, but the emotional journey from abandonment to belonging, from isolation to community. The wagon train that had left her behind was long forgotten, its destination insignificant compared to the life she had found instead. Because Roy Wilson had made a choice that day not to rush ahead or drag her along, but to walk beside her, matching his stride to hers. And in doing so, they had created something neither could have achieved alone, a haven where people were valued not for their speed but for their hearts, where, too slow, was never a reason to leave someone behind. As twilight deepened into night, Roy took Kate's hand and together they walked back into the home they had built, moving at exactly the right pace, side by side.